So today I'm going to be talking about the pitch, and just to give you guys a sense of my background, I have a company. I've done a few companies now. Right now I'm running a company that designs, engineers, and manufactures hardware for women with highly textured hair. And we are also working closely with Black Girl Ventures. Black Girl Ventures works out of DC for the most part, but we've recently expanded into 6 other cities. And what we do is we connect underrepresented entrepreneurs to capital, and we also kind of have a lot of educational initiatives. And so our biggest piece of programming is our pitch competition. Every other month or so, we're putting on a pitch competition in either DC, Philly, Detroit, New York, Birmingham, or Miami. And that is an awesome way for us to bring people together and activate our community around these startups, right? We know that startups and small businesses have a lot of capacity to close the wealth gap in our communities, but the big issue is funding, right? And so this is our way of activating our communities while simultaneously educating our communities. But over the course of the past couple of years, I've gotten a lot of experience watching a lot of people pitch and figuring out what works well and what doesn't. So before I start today, I'd like to just briefly go around the room and find out about you guys' priorities, right? Because pitches can take many forms, right? You may be pitching an investor. You may be pitching at a community-based competition. You may be pitching for a much larger competition. You may be just pitching friends and family at this point, right? And those are all very different pitches, and I want to make sure that we're giving you information that's actually useful. So if you wouldn't mind, I'd love to get your name and your experience with pitching and any pitches that you might have coming up soon.
My name is Arana Brooks. You want my company name?
Sure.
Oh, well, I'm going to start up a platform for, I have background in telehealth, mental health.
Awesome.
So I'm looking for women of color.
Yes.
Start with that first.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking about expanding to anything that deals with like the hair care, holistic, anything healthy to be on my platform.
Yeah.
That's what I want to do.
And as far as pitches go, when you think of pitching, what's your priority? Do you want to learn just general basics, or is there something that you'd like to make sure that I hone in on?
Probably general basic, and make
Got
sure
it.
that when I'm doing it, everyone understand what I'm trying to do. I guess just by saying women of color,
Yes.
right there, health,
Yes.
mental health.
Yes.
Dealing with doctors of our color, in our community.
Yes.
So that's why that understands us. So
Okay.
that's what I want on my platform.
Perfect. Okay.
Hi, I'm Dara, and I'm far from pitch ready. I'm really just attending all the sessions in this track to kind of get, I've had ideas in the past. I just want to get to maybe a space where at least I have this information under my belt before I decide whether or not my own business is something I'd want to do
Okay.
as a side business from work.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's perfect. Hi.
Hello, I'm Alicia Lane. Founded Stronger STEM LLC last month. Alpha testing my first event next Sunday.
Wow.
And hopefully beta testing in November.
Yes.
I pitched on Saturday last week.
Yeah.
And it was STEM with Friends. It was my idea for STEM with Friends.
Yeah.
I actually pitched it at Seed Spot, which is a
Yeah, I know Seed Spot with Seifer. I'm sure was there.
So I recommend doing it.
Yeah.
And yeah, I didn't win, but
Yeah.
I've recruited a lot of people too.
Did you meet Seifer there? I forget his last name. Yeah, I work with him very closely. Yes. Awesome. Can you give us an idea of your interest?
Yeah,
Hi.
My name is Dennis Isaac. Company I'm starting is called Dennis Act.
Yes.
I've worked in the garment industry for a lot of years, and after 15 years with Under Armour, I'm interested in parlaying my talents toward building next-to-skin garments for amputees.
Beautiful.
So they can transition into the prosthetics, and I do customization for. Since 2007, I've been doing customization for a lot of amputees that came back from Iraq.
Wow.
And I have a client base right now, and I'm just trying to figure out how to get that started and get proper funding so I can do a little bit more with research and development, fabrications, and so forth.
Okay, that's really interesting, and that's beautiful work. I work with an engineer who specializes in prosthetics for veterans. So if you're interested in that information, I'd love to connect with you afterwards.
I'm Virgil. Last name
We just want to know what your company is, and if you're interested in pitching, right? This session is about kind of the pitch, right? Tell me about any pitches that you may have done recently, what you're interested in, if you just want to kind of learn the general basics, or if there's a particular thing that you'd like me to hone in on.
No, not a business.
Okay.
Yeah, I haven't made any pitches. I'm just starting.
Perfect.
Actually.
That's perfect.
But I'm trying to figure out how to outsource for some engineering software.
Perfect. Got it. Thank you.
My name is Axel. I'm a student. I don't have a company, but I'm just curious. I just want to gather as much information as I can.
Yeah. Perfect. Thank you so much.
My name is Jeffrey Gray. No pitch experience, but trying to get a niche for information system security, risk management in the commercial world. I'm in the intelligence world right now, trying to do something for commercial.
Okay. Beautiful.
Hi, I'm Colleen Goff. I'm interested in cosmetics and technology. I'm currently completing the final classes of my MBA.
Okay.
So the only pitch experience I have is in a school environment.
Yep.
And this past semester we had like a client pitch. I had to pitch a marketing plan and strategy to like a sponge company based in New York.
Yeah. Okay, so this is perfect. It sounds like everybody is looking for kind of general guidance. And so what I'm going to do today is you presented in the last session, but if you'd like to tell us about any particular thing you'd like me to hone in on for kind of pitch best practices, please do.
No, I'm always interested in increasing my edge in pitching. That's
awesome.
That's how we win business. We pitch.
That's right. That's right. Okay, so we're going to keep it pretty high level. And everyone in this room is very varied, right? So I'm going to kind of give you guys a general overview of what this typically looks like, but it's also important for you guys to understand how this changes depending on the audience that you might be going after. As I kind of briefly mentioned, you may be starting out and just pitching friends and family. That's a very different pitch from pitching a VC. So we're going to go over that information, and I'm going to make sure that everybody has my information afterwards. If you have more questions, feel free to reach out. So the basic aim of a pitch is to convey your value proposition. In order to convey your value proposition, you first and foremost need a problem statement and a solution statement, right? So pretty much every pitch deck, usually when you have a pitch, you're going to be using a pitch deck. Of course, we had some technical issues today, so I wasn't able to upload that pitch deck, but this will still be perfectly clear. So the first slide in your pitch deck is just going to be kind of an opener, right? What's your company name? You might have your logo in the back. You might have one solid color. We want it to be very basic and very focused on your company. We want them to see who you are and the name of the person and the position of the person pitching, right? Very kind of straightforward. The next thing, the first thing is going to be your problem statement. What is the problem that you are trying to solve? Some of you may think, well, I don't know if I have a problem. I'm in cosmetics. It's not a problem per se. Or I'm in healthcare. I'm trying to make things better for people. It's not a problem. But what we have to remember is that when we're selling something, we're not really selling the thing, right? We're selling an answer to someone's problems. We're selling a solution to something that plagues people, right? That's how we kind of bring business into the door. And so that problem statement is really important because it really shows a succinct kind of, this is why the market, a statement of this is why the market is going to be interested in this solution. This is why people are going to buy this thing. And so, for example, as I mentioned, one of my companies develops hardware for women with textured hair. So my problem statement is very simple. women of color, and black women in particular, spend up to 3 hours styling their hair every time they wash their hair. That means every time they work out, every time you want to cleanse your scalp, every time you have a big date, every time you have a meeting, and every time you want to just perform basic hygiene, that's 3 hours out the door. Super clear, right? Everybody gets that that's a problem. That's a big kind of chunk of your time that's kind of out the window. So that sounds pretty simple, but it's really incumbent upon us to spend some time whittling down our problem statement. So, you know, often early in our businesses, it's very clear to us, it's very clear in our heads, but really getting your problem down to a sentence or two and making it connect with the room so that everybody, even people who don't necessarily have your problem, see the importance of that problem, that can be really challenging, right? So that is kind of the first thing that we can do. And if we have time, I'd like to do a little exercise where we go through a problem naming kind of exercise to, you know, kind of figure out how to whittle down our problem statements. So that's the first part of your pitch. Super important. First slide, you got to draw these guys in, right? You got to make them say, okay, like I see why I'm in this room and why this is important. So the next slide is going to be your solution slide, right? What are you doing to solve that problem? And again, sounds really simple because it's all up in our head. We have all these ideas and we know how our solution is going to change the world, but we have to convey that very succinctly in 10 words or less on a slide, in 2 sentences or less verbally. You got to convey that, right? So for example, my problem, my solution is not simple. We have spent 2 years in R&D developing new technology for women of color. It includes pumps and PCB boards and all kinds of things that are not easy to convey in a simple sentence. But what I tell investors, keep it really high level for them, is we are taking all of the components of women with textured hair's wash day, their combs, their brushes, their products, their bottles, and we are combining it into one all-in-one compact unit that's easy to use and that solves their problem fast. Right? Now, that does 2 things, right? I've told you how this, tool solves the problem, but I'm kind of leaving a little bit of a carrot. I haven't given it all away, right? We have to have something to talk about for the next, half hour to an hour, right? We're only on the second slide. So you want to, for that second slide, you want to make sure that people, they understand basically what your solution is at a high level, but you want to leave the fun, you want to leave some fun for down the road, right? One of the markers of a really good pitch, whether it's, a pitch in front of your classmates, a pitch in front of an investor, whatever it is, you want to kind of dot your presentation with high marks, right? There are inevitably going to be some pieces of your pitch that aren't as exciting, but you got to get that information in there. We want to make sure that there's a bit of, what's the word I'm looking for? There's a bit of a tone, a bit of a cadence, that's the word I'm looking for, to your pitch, right? You want to hit these high marks every 2 or 3 minutes to keep people engaged. People have really, really short attention spans, and that's not a bad thing, right? We all have really busy lives. The investor that you are sitting in front of, they have a really busy life, and it's your job to keep it exciting for them. It's your job to make sure that instead of thinking about their kid's doctor's visit and that tax bill that they haven't paid, that they're thinking about this really exciting problem that you have a really exciting solution for. So that's the solution slide in a nutshell. Then after that, you might want to go into some detail about your solution, right? So now's the time to give them a little bit more of, insight into the technology that you're building, or, the ways that your technology interacts or with the cosmetic industry and technology. This is the time to really kind of expound upon them on that and show your expertise, right? For me, this is a period where I get into the engineering. This is where I start talking about pumps and, our electrical output and, the time savings and all of the details that make this a compelling product. So, We've talked about the solution. Now this is where things get a little bit more variable, right? So we're talking to a lot of people in this room who might have a lot of different purposes. At this point, it may make sense for you to talk about your team. It may make sense to talk about the expertise that you have in-house in your company. It may make sense for you to talk more in-depthly about your experience. It could also make sense to go in another direction, right? So this is the point in your presentation where you have to think critically about your audience and what information is most important to them. So let's say that we're pitching for investors. Let's say that we're all kind of early stage companies. At this point, we're probably going to start talking about, let's say we talk about our team, right? You want to talk about maybe yourself and your co-founder and show that deep expertise. And then you also want to go into kind of detail about the rest of the team, but we don't, if you go from person to person to person and give their school and all of the jobs that they've worked, you're probably going to kind of wear everybody out. So there's a way to do kind of your team slide to keep it interesting. So I would open up by saying, something like, my team embodies 50 years of experience in the cosmetology industry or the technology industry. We're really passionate about this issue that we're trying to solve. And let me tell you why we're the people to kind of lead this initiative. At that point, you talk about yourself, again, your co-founder, and then I would give little tiny snippets about the rest of the people on your team if you have other people on your team. Now, if you don't have a team, that doesn't mean that we just kind of glaze past this slide, right? Even if you don't have people working in-house with you, we're all kind of early stage, maybe we can't afford to have people who are working full-time, that's fine. Inevitably, you're going to be working with contractors, you're going to be working with advisors. You may have a good friend in the garment industry or some veterans who can advise you on the back end of some of those issues. I would reach out to those people and ask them, hey, I may not be in a position to pay you, or I may not be in a position to pay you very much, but you know a lot about this subject, and I'd love to be able to include you on our team and just kind of build off of your expertise. 90% of the time, people tell you yes. And it's really important to have at least a little, team to show on that page, because when it's just you, even if you are the most capable person in the world, the minute or so that you've been speaking so far, whoever you're speaking to, they don't know you well enough to know that you are really going to be able to pull this off single-handedly, right? So we need to be able to demonstrate that you have people in your corner. So, if you are a student, for example, that's perfect, because that gives you a great opportunity to reach out to your teachers or your TAs and say, hey, I'd love to include you on this slide. It gives you a ton of credibility. And the fact of the matter is, people in this kind of environment love kind of being catered to and, love being fluffed up a little bit. So that's probably a really easy ask for you. So let's say we've gotten past the team slide. Next, we want to dig into some of the finer points of your company, right? So now we want to talk about your revenue model, right? How are you going to make money? At the end of the day, whoever you're pitching to, they want to know that you are going to make money for them, that their money is going to go to something that's going to be revenue generating. So, obviously, what your slide is going to look like varies wildly depending on where you are in your company and what your company is. The basic information that you want to get across is, these are our plans, right? These are our projections for the next, 6 months to a year to 5 years, again, depending on where you are. If you're super, super, super early stage, it might make sense just to give kind of 6-month projections on what your plan is to make money, right? Because, if you're just kind of coming up with an idea and you're giving me your 5-year projections and we don't have a whole lot to substantiate that, that looks less, It looks less credible to me than a year and says in great detail what their plans are. So, beyond the kind of revenue model page, we want to talk in more depth about your projections. And again, what your projections look like should vary wildly depending on the aim of your company. So if you're a nonprofit, you might be able to get away with projecting 100K in revenue over the next year. If you're talking to a venture capitalist, right, they want to see insane returns. They want to know that you're going to be able to give them 100x on their money, right? So again, depending on where your company is and what kind of company you have, we just have to think critically about what our audience is and kind of what our end goal is. Beyond that, we want to talk about our traction. So again, we're all early stage in this room. So what does that mean? Traction usually for an investor means sales. They want to see what revenue you've been able to generate. But if you haven't generated revenue yet, we still have to come up with some kind of way to show people that this is a real thing and people really care about it. So that requires doing a little bit of diligence on our part. You may not have started to generate revenue, but you may be able to show them that, look, people are really interested in this. So you may, put out a survey, right? That survey may say something, you may send it out to, 100 people, send it out on social media, you send it out to your friends, to your family, you get 100 responses in. And I say 100 because that's kind of a critical mass where pretty much everybody can say, okay, there's something here. And we want to see numbers like 80% of the people who I've polled in this niche category say that they would buy my products right now. And obviously you want to be able to substantiate that, right? So let them know. I have more details. I have, our survey responses on hand if you want to look at them in more detail later. Other ways that you can show traction is with maybe social media traction, right? So it may be that you started a Facebook group a year ago and now you've got 2,000 followers. For someone who's just starting, those kinds of numbers can be really impressive. It may be as simple as saying, I've already gotten 5 of my friends to commit $100 to whatever it is that I'm selling. So, we have to think about traction, especially in the early days, really creatively. A lot of times we see kind of early stage entrepreneurs come on stage and they say, well, I don't have traction, I'm pre-revenue. And that's not enough, right? We got to dig deeper. We got to show that we're making some effort to validate this concept, right? Because traction shows whether or not the market actually wants what you're selling. So it's important for us to kind of think creatively to show that we've done the work to validate this idea. And we can talk a little bit more about validation a little bit later. So another component that we want to make sure is incorporate into every pitch we do is our ask. That's a big deal that a lot of people kind of glaze over. So I don't care if you're in a room with your family and friends, with 5 of your friends, with your teachers, with your investors, whatever it is, you want to make sure that you're kind of getting some value out of that room. So you may be walking into a room and saying, hey, I'm looking for $500,000 for, 20% equity. You may be walking into a room and simply saying, hey, I'm looking for contacts in this industry, or I have an electrical engineering problem that I can't figure out. I'm looking for people to give me leads, contacts of theirs in the technology industry so that I can help figure out this issue and build up my network there. So always, always, always make sure that you include an ask. And always, always, always make sure that you're thinking critically about who's in the room and what they can actually do, right? So it would be insane for me personally to go into a room with my family and friends and say, hey, I'm looking for $500,000. That's not going to go anywhere. So I really have to think critically about who's there, what industries are they in, what experience do they have, how might these people be able to work, and we want to marshal our asks to their abilities, right? So much of this is making sure that we are, again, thinking critically about who our audience is, and we're tailoring our pitch there too. Now, that's kind of your basic kind of pitch deck, right? Now you may include more, you probably aren't going to include less than that, but you may include way more depending on your audience, and again, depending on your stage and depending on the needs of your company. But that's kind of the major framework that you're looking at. And I think beyond that, it's important for you guys to understand the different kinds of pitches you might run into and how they differ, right? So first and foremost, we're going to start with the friends and family pitch. Most kind of startups and small business, we're looking for that initial capital just to get off of the ground, and your friends and family is going to be the first place that you go. So for friends and family, one, our pitches have to be, one, a little bit more casual. We don't want to kind of intimidate people by using words that they might know, right? So we want to kind of tamp down our language and make sure that your presentation is accessible to everybody in the room, right? Because it may be super interesting. They may be really interested in your thing, but if you're using language and I don't know, acronyms or technical language that they just don't get, they're just going to kind of, their eyes are going to glaze over. So we want to make sure that we're kind of adjusting our language for our friends and family round to make sure that people understand what you're saying, first and foremost. Your friends and family pitch is also going to be a lot more educational than anything else, right? So some of our families are super sophisticated and they know exactly what you mean when you're talking about, giving them, having them, I don't know, take equity in your company, or what it means to be an advisor to your company. They get that. But a lot of people don't, right? So we have to kind of weave into our pitches, our friends and family pitches, like, what is this world about, right? What am I doing here? Whether you're starting a small business or a nonprofit or whatever it is, they first and foremost need to understand what that is, right? What's a 501c3 and why should I care? What is a, startup and how is that different from a small business, right? We got to kind of make all of that stuff clear. And we want to do it in a way that doesn't feel really preachy. People don't want to be preached to. They don't want to feel like they came to a class. There's a way to kind of weave this information into your pitch so that it's kind of seamless, right? So for example, when I go into a room with my friends and family and I'm pitching them on a thing, I say, hey, I've got this startup. Now you may be thinking, what's a startup, right? You may be thinking, I know a lot of people in this room own their own businesses, and so you might be thinking you know all this stuff, but I'm telling you that the startup community has a lot of potential to solve the kind of wealth gap in our community, and this is why you should care, right? So there's a way to kind of weave these little details into your pitch in a way that doesn't feel preachy, and that feels really approachable to people. And then, with friends and family, again, we want to think about our ask and what's appropriate for that room. And also, we want to give people comfort, right? So if you're talking to a VC, they've got a really big appetite for risk. So it may make sense for you to, ask for $500,000 for a tiny percentage of equity in your company, but that doesn't make sense for your friends and family. I have to make it seem worthwhile for them. And so in order to do that, we got to think about what that group cares about, right? Do these people love me? Do they just want to support me because of who I am? If that's the case, then they're going to find value in just supporting you, right? So it may be something like, look, Dad, you spent all of this money on schools for however many years, and I know that you want to see me do something great. You want to see me kind of really blossom as a professional, and this is my opportunity to do that, right? You would never say something like that in a pitch meeting with, say, VC, right? But when you're with friends and family, it's a little bit different, and you have a little bit more insight into what moves those people and what drives those people, and so you want to marshal that. It may be, look, your best friend is in the room, and you're saying, look, friend, I know that you've been really interested in the cosmetology industry for some time, and if this gets off the ground, we can do this together, that kind of thing, right? So understanding their incentives, understanding what drives them really makes a big difference. Okay, so that's the friends and family pitch. If we're doing, say, a community pitch competition, right, it's really important for you to obviously hit all of the basics of your pitch, but we also want to make sure that we're appealing to what brought that room together, right? So for example, Black Girl Ventures, when we put on a pitch competition, the room is usually filled with 90% Black women, right? I know what moves that crowd. It's usually a crowd that's really interested in supporting Black women entrepreneurs. It's usually a crowd that's really interested in advocacy and advocating for their communities, right? So in BGV competitions, the people who really play to that, those are the ones who end up getting the prize. Those are the ones who end up winning, right? Because they win over the crowd. They've identified what that crowd is interested in. Then you've got investor pitches. Now, investor pitches can look a lot of different ways. So you can have an investor who, has typically, maybe, is relatively comfortable, has a little bit of spare change, and maybe has invested in a couple of restaurants, but has never invested in a startup. That's going to be a very different conversation than if you're pitching a VC, right? VCs are very kind of stringent. They have very specific things that they're looking for, and you want to make sure that you play to that. So even with it amongst investors, understanding how they're positioned, why they're interested in you in the first place, and how you might appeal to them is really important. So for example, early on, you may get in touch with some investor, a friend of a friend, or a cousin of whomever, of a colleague. And those people are usually, a couple of degrees separated from you. And so, I find kind of those initial investor meetings are kind of a hybrid of an investor conversation and a friends and family conversation, right? Those people have taken that meeting with you more than likely because of a relationship, or because they're really interested in this problem that you're solving, or what have you. And so again, you want to be formal here, and you want to kind of make sure that you're hitting on all of the major issues. How are we doing on time? Okay. But we also want to make sure that we're kind of giving them that personal connection, but we're also giving them the professionalism and the due diligence that shows that we've done the work and we've laid the foundation. And then VC pitches are a completely different ordeal altogether, right? Obviously, these guys are coming in with a mission, right? They are, there on behalf of their fund, right? They have a job to do, and they want to make sure that you've kind of crossed all of your T's and dotted all of your I's, and those are going to be very formal, very direct, and we don't really have the time to go into everything that you have to consider for a VC kind of conversation, but I think that given where we are in the room for the most part, like, we're going to be having one of the first 3 conversations, and I think that kind of lays the groundwork. And so I think it's important to remember that for pitches, we don't want to think of it as a monolith that really just kind of depends on where you are, who you are, what your company is focused on, and what your goals are. And it's important to be able to kind of have your head on a swivel, right? Understand the basic format, understand the basic points that you need to drive home. Make sure that you are delivering your problem, your solution, you're showing your revenue model and what you're going to do, you're showing how you're going to make money, you're describing your technology, you're making a solid, clear ask, and at the end, you're kind of showing how you're going to deliver value for that person. But beyond that, how you kind of structure your pitch, the extra slide decks that you might want to slip in, all of that is going to be dependent on your audience and their needs. So we have about 5 minutes left, and I wanted to make sure that we don't have any questions. And if we don't have any questions, I have a couple of exercises that we can do quickly.
I was going to say one thing.
Please do.
I just did a validation on my Facebook to see how many girlfriends are interested in my platform.
Awesome.
They said, yes, build it. This and that, they gave me a like, so like several different likes.
Yes,
so
that's great.
Validation right there.
That's great, and that's an awesome place to start. And with that, I think validation is such an important piece of this puzzle, right? Because it's not enough that I want to build this solution. I have to show that the market wants it too.
Yeah.
Right, and that's awesome.
I
And
never knew that.
Yeah, and that's great that you just kind of thought critically about what it needed and you did it. But then beyond that, right, our friends and our family are kind of biased, right, because they love us and they know how smart we are, and they're always going to give us that. They're not always going to give us that like, but they're a little bit more likely to give us that like. I would, beyond that, I would take those 5 people and I would have an interview with them, right? I would interview them and ask them very high level, look, tell me about a time that you have encountered X problem, whatever the problem is that you want to solve. And then, the other question that I would ask is, tell me the ways that you have currently used to address that problem. And I wouldn't go into a whole lot more detail than that, because after a certain point, we're kind of leading the person down the path that we want to lead them. And at this stage, you want to get really kind of high level kind of narratives on how people experience that this problem, where exactly their pain points are, what they're using to solve the solution right now, right? How much are they paying to solve that solution? How frequently do they need to solve that solution, right? So that validation piece kind of happens in stages. So first we might put out our Facebook post. Then we want to do our deep interviews. Those interviews will give us a sense of the additional questions that we need to ask. And then after that, I will put together a full survey. I will put together, something maybe no more than 10 questions, but very directed 10 questions that speak to those pain points that you're starting to see a pattern with as you interview people.
When you say that, I think I'm doing like a landing page would be a good idea.
Absolutely.
So to let people know out there that don't know me, so I get it real direct.
Yeah.
So I think I'll do a landing page.
I think a landing page is awesome, and it's simple, it's really easy, and having the combination of those two, your landing page and a little survey, people click this button if you'd like to help us change the world.
Give me your card, okay?
Absolutely.
I need to touch you because I like that.
Yeah.
I'll do that.
Yeah. And I would, put that survey out. You ask those initial 5 people who liked your thing. Ask them to send it to 5 people that they know that have the same problem.
Good idea.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. And then I would, beyond that, find a couple of social media groups and kind of post it on those social media groups.
I think I did one, but I'm thinking, you ever heard of Team Girl Track?
No.
Oh, okay. That's another. I might do it.
Yeah. Yeah. But the important part is, you've started the validation process. And beyond that, you want to make sure that you are getting kind of third-party objective feedback.
Right.
And you want to hear when people say, some people are going to say, I don't need this, right? That's just as valuable as the people who say that they do need it, right?
That's what I said, I'm doing strangers.
Yeah, that's right.
Thank you.
That's right, sure.
Let me just brainstorm, sorry everyone.
No worries. Anyone else? Were there any questions, any other ideas anybody had?
Is there much variance to this process if your goal is a service or a business focused in nonprofit space?
Yeah, totally.
How do you?
I'm gonna come back to you. I thought that you were giving her a.
I was asking a question. Sorry.
Okay.
No
worries. Okay, so totally, yeah. So each of our pitch decks, and it's really difficult to do a pitch compendium in 40 minutes, right? Because pitches can take so many different forms. But yeah, absolutely. If you're performing a service, so performing a service is very different than, say, having a physical product, right? Because when you have a physical product or when you have something else that's like super scalable, I can show kind of that J curve. I can show that like ramp up. But when you're a single person performing a service, it's a little different, right? Your time is limited. You can only do so many meetings with however many people. I don't know exactly what your business is or what service you would be.
I don't have one. I just was thinking about the nonprofit space over the for-profit.
Yeah.
If there was a large variance in how you would go about.
Very much so. So, if you're performing a service, I have to show that my time is going to be more valuable over time because, again, I have a set amount of time. And if I'm a solo practitioner, the only way that I make more money is by making my time more valuable and over time being able to command more dollars for that hour. If you're a nonprofit, it's a little different, right? If you're a nonprofit, you probably aren't going to be pitching to VCs. You're probably going to be pitching more to foundations, and foundations are structured very differently and they have a very different set of values, right? And so you don't necessarily have to show this really dramatic J curve in your projected revenues. you have to show that your impact is going to have that J curve, right? You would have to show that, this year I may only be able to serve 20 students in the Baltimore area, but next year with additional partnerships and with your contribution to our organization, we'll be able to do that times 10 or whatever it is, right? So again, it's all about thinking critically about how you're positioned and who your audience is and how to marshal those two together.
Do you have any online resources that you recommend?
I'll make sure you get a card, and I can send you an email.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
How do you measure being able to convey a large amount of material in short time periods? Sometimes, like if you're meeting with like C-suite people,
Yeah.
like you have 30 minutes for you to pitch this idea. And like one area that I struggle with, I'm sure you guys do, is like I'm very animated, so I can, instead of taking things deliberately, I'll speed up.
Yeah.
The brand. And so what do you recommend for pacing yourself to still give an appropriate level of information without it turning into a rambling?
I get it. I get it. So I'm a lawyer by training, and so I go into these pitches and I want to talk, right? Like I want to give you the whole monologue. Nobody's responding to that. They just kind of, their eyes glaze over. And so what I try to do is cut my pitch into half. If I know that I'm going to be there for 30 minutes, let's give them at least 10 minutes for questions. So that gives me a 20-minute pitch. And so I need to get my pitch down to 10 minutes. And that sometimes initially kind of felt to me like I was cutting myself short. But it's not, because quite frankly, you're not really there to talk about you, right? You're there to talk about them. You're there to figure out what their needs are, and you need a little bit more time to answer or to tease out what's important to them, right? So if you're with the C-suite, you need to know, where their problem areas are. If they're having like huge client attrition rates, why do you think that is, right? So that you can answer, so that you can kind of marshal your solution to their actual problem. And so it's really important for me to kind of whittle my pitch down as little as possible. Quite frankly, when we're not really selling ourselves, we're selling to their problems, as you well know, right? And so we have to leave some time to get in, their problems. But also, if I, kind of give myself that 10-minute pitch, at most, even if I go over 5 minutes, which is pretty egregious, right? That's an extra 50%. I still have plenty of time left in that pitch session to make sure that they're actually heard and that their questions are being answered. So that's one tactic. Another tactic I would use is whittling everything down to maybe 14 words. Definitely, in my pitch deck, I do not have more than 14 words on the screen, and that's really, really hard to do. But it's really important, right? Because if you can't convey your solution succinctly, then you probably aren't organized in your thought, right? So that gives me an opportunity to make sure that I am laser focused on what information I need to convey for that slide. And also, I have a formula for kind of each of my slides, but for my value proposition, right? That's usually where I don't know about you, but that's where I end up spending a whole lot of time. And so I've spent a lot of time with every business whittling down that value proposition so I can get it down to a sentence. That's so hard to do because we have so much value that we want to convey, but you want to show what niche you're serving, what the major problem is, and how your solution differs from everybody else on the market. And so for us, that's something like with our all-in-one compact solution, we help women of color embrace their natural hair textures with technology that's tailored for them. Super simple. Leaves a whole lot to the imagination. Still a whole lot of information that I need to convey somewhere in that pitch, but we've gotten it down so that it's nice and succinct. Does that help at all? Great. So it looks like my time's up, and thank you guys so much for having me.